Hello, students. This is Professor McDermott. Well, I'm going to have several important announcements, but I'll save those till the end, so keep watching. Let's start, as we always will, with a recap of your Module 1 discussions on the Age of Exploration. Group 1 had a letter that Christopher Columbus wrote to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, talking about his discoveries and especially about the Indians that he met there. And the first question I asked Group 1 was, what qualities of the Indians did Columbus emphasize, and why do you think he emphasized those particular qualities? And your chair, Derek, who I really want to thank for stepping in at the last minute, I really appreciated that, Derek, posted the group's answer, which was a very good one. We came to a conclusion as a group that Columbus reported his findings in a way to make it seem as if the Indians would be good servants and they would blend in as a Spanish colony. He reported that their body build was strong and their skin complexion was similar to the Canary Islanders. If the Indians were of a healthy and strong build, they automatically would seem like good servants. We also think that he made a point to describe the skin complexion of the Indians to be the same as the Canary Islanders, which happens to be a territory of Spain. We feel that he made this a point to imply that they would blend in with the local people. Excellent answer, Group 1. And I just want to add, there was no way you would have known this from the document, but another reason he mentioned the Indian skin complexion was that because the Indians were living in the tropics, according to the science of the time, Europeans would have expected them to have very dark skin, like people in Central Africa. But in fact, their skin was lighter toned than that, and that really surprised Columbus and the Europeans, that they looked so much like the Canary Islanders, who lived farther north and who had a lighter skin tone. All right. Second, I asked, why does Columbus think the Indians will be easy to convert to Christianity, and how sound was Columbus's reasoning on this point? And Group 1, you had a very interesting difference of opinion here. On the one hand, Deborah Jacobs was pointing out that Columbus thought the Indians would be easy to convert to Christianity because, according to him, they had no religion. And Deborah also pointed out that the document actually contradicts that, because at one point, Columbus describes the Indians thanking God. So Deborah didn't think Columbus's reasoning was sound. On the other hand, Leslie Hall pointed out that because of the Indians' generosity and their willingness to trade and their willingness to learn from the Spaniards, repeating things they said and so forth, that she thought Columbus's reasoning was sound, that the Indians would be open to conversion. And Group 1, you handled that disagreement exactly the way you should. You discussed the merits of it, and you let it give you deeper insight, and then in your answer, you combined both perspectives in a way that was really nice, really balanced. So, excellent job. Finally, I asked, why did Columbus think that the Indians were naive about weapons? And again, how sound was his reasoning on this point? And your answer was also right on the target. Columbus thought that because when the Spaniards showed the Indians their swords, the Indians grabbed the swords by the sharp edges and cut themselves. And Group 1, I think you correctly pointed out that this was a cultural misunderstanding. Just because the Indians didn't know about Spanish weapons doesn't mean that they didn't know about weapons at all. In fact, they had their own types of weapons. So all of this, I think, points to something we should always keep in mind as historians. Whenever we read a document, we need to understand the purpose of the document and how that purpose might bias the author. In this case, Columbus was obviously trying to convince King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella that the Indians would be very easy to conquer. They would be very cooperative because they were so peace-loving. They'd be very easy to convert to Christianity. They didn't even know about weapons, and so they wouldn't fight back and so forth. In other words, he was telling them just what they wanted to hear, so that they would approve further explorations and further expeditions among these people. And that was Columbus's agenda. So we should always be aware of the agendas that our authors might have in these documents. Turning to group 2, they had an account of the conquest of Mexico by Cortez, written by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was one of Cortez's soldiers. So this is an eyewitness account. And Diaz really praises the Aztec culture in many ways. He talks about what an impressive man the Emperor Montezuma was. And Kevin Lyon, you also did an excellent job as chair, so I want to read the answer that you gave. What did Diaz admire about Montezuma? After discussing with my classmates, I found that Emperor Montezuma had numerous traits that Diaz liked. Emperor Montezuma lived a polished lifestyle. The 4 that stuck out to us the most are the large aviary, that's a birdhouse, the extravagant meals, his large army, and his endless wardrobe. Diaz says that he could hardly tell the difference between each bird because he had so many in his aviary. Diaz even mentioned that at dinner time he would have 30 different entrees prepared for him. William brought up a good point when he explained that Emperor Montezuma could be a charming leader, but he could also be stern when he needed to be. He was able to prove this because he raised such a large army. We all agreed his lifestyle was extravagant. He was always clean from taking baths. And Jasmine and Gabrielle really picked up on this nicely and pointed out that, in fact, in Europe at this time, people rarely took baths. And that's one reason why that little detail stood out, that Montezuma actually took a bath every day, was really surprising to Diaz because Europeans almost never took baths at that point in history. All right, and in your answer to question 2, you pointed out many other things that Diaz admired about Aztec culture, especially the fantastic marketplace, the variety of goods on sale there, entertainment, and so forth, and the weapons that the Aztecs had, which were made of precious metals. But at a certain point in their document, Diaz really changed his tone and talked about the Aztecs in a very negative and dark way. And you correctly pointed out that this had to do with human sacrifice. This was the one thing about Aztec culture that the Spaniards simply couldn't abide. And Carlson, you had an excellent post on this point. Diaz de Castillo describes the manner of the Aztec sacrifices. He describes how they strike open the human's chest and tear out the heart. They then rip off the arms and legs and feed them to the beasts of the palace. Diaz exclaims that there are many beasts, such as lions, tigers, and serpents, that appear to have bells on their tails. And you correctly pointed out these are rattlesnakes, one of the first depictions of rattlesnakes in all of literature. You can tell that Diaz does not favor the beasts which the humans are fed to because he states, "It was so appalling that one appears to be in hell." So for Diaz, in a way, Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, was like heaven in many ways. But with regard to the sacrifices, it was hell. But that in itself gave the Spaniards a motive for conquering the Aztecs, because they could always tell themselves, no matter how badly they had treated the Aztecs, well, at least they put a stop to the sacrifices in Mexico. So, all right, moving on to Group 3. Now, Group 3 had an account of Cortez's conquest of Mexico written from the Aztec viewpoint, one that was written down several decades later in a Christian mission by a priest, but this was an Aztec eyewitness account. And I asked, how did Montezuma react to Cortez's arrival, and why? And in your group's answer, you said, it is safe to say that Group 3 agreed that Montezuma welcomed Cortez and the Spaniards with open arms, treating Cortez like the ancient god they believed him to be. They not only looked up to Cortez, but bowed down to him, giving him flowers and putting necklaces and flower wreaths around his neck. Absolutely right. It was Montezuma's conviction that Cortez was actually the god Quetzalcoatl, come back to rule Mexico, that made him roll out the red carpet for Cortez and welcome him as a god. and hand over the kingdom to Cortez. But then in the account, it describes how the mood suddenly changed, the mood of the Aztec crowd, when Cortez took Montezuma prisoner and held him as a hostage. And the document actually says everything was so confusing at that point that people felt like they were tripping on psychedelic mushrooms, which the Aztecs pioneered the use of, by the way. And so I asked, why did the Aztecs feel that way? What shocked them so much? And here, this is a good lesson for all of us. There are several people raised interesting questions about this, and you guys were confused too about this question. So I think when this happens, stay with the question. Don't give up. Keep discussing. And the answer will emerge, I think. You will find a deeper insight, but don't give up on the question. Just keep discussing on the focus thread until you get to an answer. Ramona, one of your questions was very interesting. Why did Cortez kidnap Montezuma? I mean, why would he do that? Montezuma had just handed over the kingdom to him. Well, this is open interpretation. My own viewpoint is that for Cortez, it was almost too good to be true. I think he almost couldn't believe his good fortune that Montezuma had welcomed him in this way. And being a soldier, Cortez is used to solving problems through military force, and so he decided to take matters into his own hands. Perhaps if he could have just believed in his incredible good luck in being believed to be a god, some of the negative things wouldn't have happened that happened later. Their final question, how did smallpox affect the Aztecs? And you all pointed out correctly that it killed many Aztecs. It weakened them as a military power. It really enabled, in a way, the Spaniards to conquer the Aztecs once the Aztecs started to fight back. And I want to point out one other thing, though, one little bit of the document that no one mentioned. The pustules that covered people, this is the document, caused great desolation. Very many people died of them, and many just starved to death. Starvation reigned, and no one took care of others any longer. And I think that last phrase is maybe the most poignant phrase in the whole document. No one took care of others any longer. In other words, the Aztecs were so devastated by this disease that they stopped caring about each other. And when that happens, you're talking about a culture in a state of complete collapse, as the Aztecs were at this time. So overall, all groups, I think you're really getting the hang of it, and I'm very impressed so far with how early you're getting the hang of this. And so I just encourage you, as we move through further discussions in this coming module, to keep that up and to extend it even further, have even more discussion on the focus threads, and really get to the bottom of these documents. Now, in Module 2, you're actually not going to have a document, though. This is the only time. Your 2 questions will be solely on a video, which is also about Cortez. So I want to go a little deeper into this event, which is such a fascinating event. And so watch the video, and you'll have 2 discussion questions on that. 6th day of Module 2 is Tuesday, January 24th. So in order to get a chance at full credit for your discussions, please have your first post for each of those 2 questions up by Tuesday, January 24th. And then jump on the focus threads and keep discussing, and then post your answer by Monday, January the 30th. The chairs for this module: Group 1, Alexis Beery; Group 2, Roshonda Kendrick; Group 3, Rita Reynolds. Now, very important announcements here. First of all, in Module 2, our post is the instructions for your 3 written assignments are posted. So please read those carefully and let me know if you have any questions. First stage of that, the written assignments, is due at the end of Module 3. Also, your study guide for the exam, which will come at the end of Module 3, is posted, along with a short video on how to write a good exam essay. Because yes, my exams do have an essay question. That video will really help you. Now, speaking of the exams, and speaking of helping you, I had a middle-aged moment, and in all the bureaucratic stuff I have to do, I forgot to submit an important form to the Department of Online Learning, and as a result, it's now illegal for me to give you proctored exams. That means that our exams will not be proctored. You do not have to go to the testing center. You do not have to use ProctorU. Just before the exam, I'll send you the passwords and you can do it on your home computers. And that means I will just have to trust you, as I do, not to cheat. But we'll talk more about that later. So you don't have to worry about proctoring now. Ignore that part of the syllabus. And I'll give you further instructions when we get closer to the time. Finally, some people asked, I post the grades for your self-introductions, and I will post your other grades for Module 1 before Monday. But some people asked, why does it say dropped with an exclamation point next to that grade? Well, it's just that the grade book is set up to drop the 5 lowest grades for discussions. That is also to help you. And so because that was the first grade, it is the lowest grade up to this point, and so it will be dropped. It does not mean that you are being dropped from the course, so don't worry. But you'll see as the course goes on that only the lowest grades will be dropped. So even though a high grade may be dropped for now, because it's one of the first 5 grades, as the course goes on, you'll see that it's really only the low grades that will get dropped. All right, I think that's everything. Thank you very much for your hard work in Module 1, and I look forward to working with you in Module 2.